Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the State Water Survey. Um, Today, our webinar is Well Care 101, What You Need to Know to Protect Your Family. The private well class sponsors this webinar, and it's part of our program through the private well class, and we're funded, sponsored, and supported by US EPA and the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. Um, First things first, we do offer CEs, continuing education credit, for these webinars, both for Illinois LEHP credit and through NEHA for EHPs. And so if just want to mention that we do this webinar regularly, usually every 5 or 6 months. And so if you can see on the bottom left, or bottom right, excuse me, all the other times we've done this. So for example, if your credentialing cycle just started this month and you're a NEHA person, then you can't take this webinar again, Well Care 101, until after 10/1/24. We do provide things there's a handouts in the GoToWebinar box, and you can email us. Katie will work with you to get your credit for those. And we've had a lot of issues with folks wanting to watch the recording. You can't get any credit for watching the recording. You need to attend live and be an active participant. Okay, so as I mentioned, this webinar is part of our national program implemented through RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, to support private well owners. And so this webinar is just a small piece of the private well class program. In fact, there's a 10-lesson class that I'll talk about more that you sign up for online. It sends you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. It really has a lot more information and much better answers than I can give you on the fly for some of the questions you asked today. I encourage everyone who is interested in learning more about their well and how to take care of it to sign up and take the class. Yeah, and at the end, we will have time for follow-up questions. So as you know, when you registered, you were given the opportunity to ask questions. We had, I think, around 100 or so folks ask questions. We're going to answer some of those. They're actually part of the slide deck, but we won't get to all of them. But we also allow you during the webinar, if there's something that I say or something that comes up and you have a question, you can type that in the chat box or the question box. Katie Buckley is going to monitor that, and she'll keep a list of those, and we'll go over them at the end, and we'll stay and answer questions as long as you're here to listen. Okay, so a little bit about RCAP, who sponsors us. They also are a partner in this program. They're a national nonprofit that helps rural areas, small communities, and private well owners. They're made up of 6 smaller nonprofits that are regional in scope. They're listed here. If you're in one of these states and you're a well owner, they have a well person who can do an assessment, answer your questions, provide advice. We have an assessment program that it's a one-on-one with the well owner where they'll come out and talk with you, look at your well, find out information about your well depth of whatever they can find through the state or local agency, and then share all that information with you and give you an assessment of if there's any vulnerabilities related to your well or practices around your well. They also, if you're a professional, they can work with you to put on workshops. They work with hundreds of organizations around the country between the 6 regions and what we do. And so if you're interested in having a workshop for well owners in your local jurisdiction, RCAP would be a great partner, or one of these 6 nonprofits. You can email us, or you can email them, find them online and email them directly. Each one has a web page devoted to the private well program, so you can find information there. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the basics of well care and how to ensure your well safe and stuff. Again, we've received a lot of questions. Introductions, I'm Steve Wilson. Oh, I have this wrong. I forgot to change this. Katie was gone last time, and so Jennifer Wilson stepped in for her. But today, it's myself and Katie Buckley, who is an outreach specialist on our program. She handles all the CE work, does a lot of the outreach for us, and she'll be fielding your questions today. I apologize, Katie. And then Walt Kelly's the head of the groundwater section here at this State Water Survey. He's a geochemist, and he helped with some of the questions that we received in advance, providing some of the answers, especially things related to chemistry. That's kind of his specialty. So the water survey, I talk about this every month, but it's important that everyone who's new understand. We're unique. We're the only water survey in the country, but we're a sister agency to our state geological survey. And so there's one of those in nearly every state. If you're familiar with your state geological survey, we provide all the water related services in the state that a geological survey might do in your state. We've been around since 1895, so we're 127 years old. It was started because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks, and it's evolved into an organization that does public service and outreach, as well as applied research related to water quality, both in Illinois and around the country. I know I've been involved in a lot of different types of research related to arsenic, and now we're looking at Legionella. There's a lot of things related to wells and groundwater that there's still a lot of unknowns, and we get to do that kind of work. It's pretty fun. And so these are just some diagrams and things from our archives. This is about typhoid, and you can see it goes from 1873 to 1910 for Quincy, Illinois, and it's all about the time when treatment was started in municipal water systems. And so we were involved with a lot of the work to get new treatment added to both water, drinking water, and wastewater, and not only Illinois, but around the country at the time. There's a ton of information in the 1910s where we were doing a lot of seminal research on wastewater treatment, for instance. It's really interesting. These typhoid cases, though, they're all individual cases in given communities. This is my favorite slide, I think. This is an old glass plate. We have about 1,500 of these. Some of them are broken. They've been put in storage for a long time. But in 1913, there was an outbreak of typhoid in Rockford. And one of the mechanisms they found where typhoid might be being spread is through milk. A lot of centralized folks went to one place to get milk. A lot of times it was one large container where everyone dipped a bucket to get their milk out for the day. And so this was actually a dairy route in the country. And so one of the things they did is tried to find out if there are any cases of typhoid on this E. Erickson's dairy route, which, you know, there were 112 cases as of September 10th, and only 7 of those there were actually part of the route. But it's interesting that they investigated this, and this is one of the products of that investigation, if you will. We used to sample all the community park wells. They had hand pumps like this. You can see the little tin cup. I remember when I was a kid in Middletown, Illinois, we had there was a tin cup on a hand pump in our park still, and that was, you know, in the 70s. But we sampled those wells. This is obviously a lot older than that based on the vehicles, which some of these have been outlawed since then. But it's just part of the history of what we've done. Weldon, Illinois is a small community in central Illinois. This is what a drill rig used to look like. Obviously, if you've been around a drill rig when a new well's installed, they're much different today. So getting to our webinar topics today, the things to remember as a well owner, that as a private well owner, your well is not regulated. Once it's installed and it's passed inspection, the only time there's testing, there may never be testing unless it's required by the state at a property transfer or by the bank or mortgage company at property transfer. But there aren't any regulations to support well owners to make sure your water is safe to drink. Like a community well has to test every 3 months, or a community water supply, to ensure the water they're providing to all their residents is safe. That's your job as a well owner. And you can't go by taste, color, or odor. Some things like arsenic have no taste. They're colorless, odorless, and the only way to know is to test. And you know people like my dad who swore by our well water, even though we know now, or I know now as an adult, that our well was never safe. It was an old hand dug well that let water in from the surface, and so it's just my body was used to those bacteria, but our well was always contaminated. So I don't live in the country anymore. I live in town, and I'm on a community water supply, so I pay $40 or $50 a month for my water, which is spread out over all the residents here. And that's so that the water supply and the water company here can make sure that I have safe water, and I always have water pressure, and there's lines that run to my house. And again, as a well owner, those are all things you're responsible for. And again, here at the last bullet here, we find that really the two biggest reasons when there are well problems are really a poor well construction, because when well construction code in any given state is updated or changed or even created, all the wells that already exist are grandfathered in. And so your well, unless it's fairly new, may not meet current construction code, and that's okay based on the law. And we still have two states that don't have well construction code. And so if you're in one of those states, that's obviously an issue. Anybody can drill any kind of well they want, and that's not necessarily the way it should be, but it is the way it is. And the other thing is just lack of knowledge, not understanding what it means to be a well owner, how to ensure that it's safe to drink. A lot of folks just assume that it's coming from the ground, it's got to be okay, and that's just not true. Even if it's properly constructed and properly sealed at the surface, there are natural occurring contaminants in groundwater because of the source rock and sand and gravel. The geologic materials may contain things like arsenic or radium or whatever that are harmful for your health. So for well considerations, for well depth, deeper is generally better. We get a lot of questions about, well, how deep should my well be? That really depends on your location, where you're at. It matters whether you're in the northern part of the country where there's glaciation. You may have sand and gravel wells that you can tap into under your property, or you may be in an area where it's bedrock at the surface and you're going to have a bedrock well. You may have multiple options. It really just depends. So the well depth is really dictated by the geology and how safe and what's going on with the geology, really. And so in some areas, we have a lot of wells that are less than 100 feet deep, and they're perfectly fine. In other areas, you may have to drill 600 or 700 feet to get to water, and that's just the way it is. So also location on the landscape. Are you on a bluff above a nice pretty stream? It may be up on that bluff, there's no water, so you end up putting your well down in the bottoms by that stream. Well, there's going to be more sand and gravel there because it was deposited when the stream, all the flooding that happened and all those things. But it's also could be connected to that stream where it's got more access to bacteria and other things. Groundwater flow direction. If you're in an area, groundwater flows based on pressure, so it doesn't necessarily follow an aquifer. I should say that an aquifer, the flow direction in an aquifer doesn't necessarily follow the landscape, where the groundwater flow direction in the water table, which is where the soil becomes saturated at the surface, it usually does. So what I tell folks, if you have shallow hand dug wells or bored wells that are getting water from the water table, then you can tell by where you're at on the landscape which way the groundwater flow direction is actually going in the water table. And so, for instance, in a rural subdivision that's near a lake, if you're the one farthest from the lake, highest up on the landscape, your water is getting water from above that, if there is, or from infiltration. But the person that's down near the bottom is getting all the water that's infiltrating the ground in the entire subdivision, including from their septic. And so there's more of a risk there if you have a shallow well. And then just understanding the area around your well. Are there livestock? Is there row crops or something else going on? Are you next to a gas station? I mean, there's a lot of things that can affect your water quality, and understanding, just being observant about what's nearby matters. We see a lot of times in rural areas where there's homes right next to each other, maybe acre lots. You may have your well on the east side of your house and your septic on the west side, but if the guy next to you does the same thing, that means his septic is right next to your well. And if there wasn't due diligence done when those were installed, and when the inspector came to look at where the design for the septic system was going in, they may not have realized that there's a well on the next property. And those are just all things that you need to be aware of. As far as correcting poor construction, Illinois passed well construction code in 1968. And so, but that code has changed over time, especially for bored wells and how they're installed. And so, but wells, as I mentioned before that, or when a new update was done that were put in before, they're grandfathered in. So we still see wells in pits. We're in a northern climate. So before the 60s, wells were put down in a pit so that they wouldn't have to worry about frost in the frost line or a freeze line in the winter. And now we have pitless adapters that allow that whole unit to be below the frost line, and it still makes it easy to pull the pump and all those things. But we inventory a lot of wells in Illinois when we're doing a research study in an area. And I know in central Illinois, we evaluated every well in 9 townships, and I think there were 1,700 wells. There were at least 50 or 60 wells that were still in a pit. And those are dangerous, not only from the water quality standpoint. They had a big rainstorm that fills up with water. If your casing isn't properly sealed and has a gasket and is actually airtight, then water from the surface is going to come right in your well. So there's things like that, and that's why you shouldn't have those wells. And also hand dug wells, which, like the one I grew up on, my grandpa dug in 1933. It's only 14 feet deep. It's in a ravine in the middle of a pasture with livestock. And so again, it has about every type of issue you could ask for as far as surface water runoff and livestock and all those things. And it's not only about the contamination, but it's also a safety hazard. We see pictures of, well, I'll just show you. As far as poor construction, the picture on the upper left is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. This is, they have a blog. They are the state agency in Washington State that regulates drillers and well construction. And so they had a blog for a while. I'm not sure if they still maintain that. This is probably from 2013 or 14. But this woman had walked over top of her well many times. This time the plywood broke and she fell to her death. But if you look at this is a little well house. You can see all the gray stuff that's along the back wall where the funnel is. That's probably insulation. There's probably mice in there. There's the funnel's probably to put oil in the pump. Anything that falls in that well can eventually end up coming as part of your water supply going in your house. The picture on the bottom is a hand dug well that we sampled as part of a water quality study. The mud that you see on the lower right along the fence post, those are footprints from cattle. This is a pasture, and that's the reason those posts are rubbed raw. Is the cattle use those for scratching posts, and so they're spending time near this well and doing their business. And there's a field just above that that sometimes is in corn, so they're applying pesticides and other things. And so, and it's not properly covered. It's got 2x10s and some pieces of tin with bricks and blocks and rocks on it. Guarantee you that mice, snakes, other things can get in this well, which they fall in there and they can't get out. They end up becoming just part of the water supply. And the picture on the upper right, it's an old brick well in southern Illinois that they put a concrete tile vertically in the top, but it only stuck up about 12 inches and it wasn't capped. And this goat managed to find its way in there and no one noticed. And so that's what it looked like when he took the picture. Pretty disgusting, but we see it all the time. I know on our webinar, probably 6 or 8 months ago, we had a question from someone. They found 40 snakes in their well, and this is well water that their father had been drinking. And so these things happen. People don't understand. It's out of sight, out of mind, and none of these are a safe situation. So what should you do? Look up what the well code is in your state. If there's not well code in your state, which those 2 states are Alaska and Pennsylvania, then find proper construction code from another state or talk to a licensed driller from another state. Extend the pipe if it's a pit up to the ground surface, fill that in. Talk to well authority or your county or a contractor or local health district about the best approach to make that safe, and put a sanitary well cap on your well to protect it. from any kind of surface influence. Same thing with abandoned wells. So there's probably as many abandoned wells in the country as there are wells in use. There's about 21 million wells in use around the country, serving over 50 million people. And they're just there where an old farmstead was. Somebody tore down the house, put up a new house, and they decided to put in a new well. Especially those old dug wells tend to stick around because it costs money to actually seal them and properly abandon them. And so what I can say to you, if you're a well owner and you have an old unsealed well, is it's really important to properly abandon that. Because if it's on your property, whether somebody's supposed to be there or not, they fall in and it kills them or they get hurt, you're going to be responsible. Also, if it's connected to an aquifer, if people dump things in there, throw stuff in these, it's a nice, well, the best example I have is we did a well abandonment as a demonstration working with the Groundwater Guardians group and a county health department in Illinois. And when we pulled the cap off, or the big concrete pad off, there were thousands and thousands of cigarette butts down in this well. And it turned out that the person who lived there before wasn't using the well. They're actually on city water. But there's a 3-inch hole that was left in the concrete where the old hand pump had been, and they use that as their ashtray. And so there were lighters, and if that particular well wasn't at risk of contaminating the community's water supply, but it could have been. And so you're responsible for those things, and they're worth getting taken care of, filling them with bentonite or concrete and sealing them according to whatever your state's code might be. In some states, I know in Illinois, before the pandemic, the soil and water conservation districts had a cost share program where, let's say it would cost $1,000 to abandon a well, they would put up to $500 of that. And so those are things you can also look into. Just some more examples, and these are abandoned wells. One has a horse. They're pulling a horse out. Hopefully he's fine. And again, these two pictures are both from the Washington State Department of Ecology. But the Sheldon man falls 45 feet into a well. They pulled him out. It was in his backyard, and they pulled him out, and he walked away. Very lucky person. And these newspaper clippings are all from the 90s. These are all 3 of these are from Illinois. The third one down, though, is from Texas. For those of you old enough to remember, back in the 90s, Jessica McClure was a young 18-month-old who fell down a well, and it was covered live on CNN for, I want to say, almost 2 days while they dug her out, and they did. She's fine. She's married and has 3 kids today. So anyway, it's important because they do kill people because you don't know what's there and you fall into it. People who like to go walking through the woods and things may end up on private property, and that's what could happen. So as far as basic well care, I'll just mention up front that if you're not comfortable and you don't have experience working with your well, the best thing to do is use a licensed well driller, a pump installer, contractor when doing repair work on your well. It's not something to take lightly. Just because it's the water you drink, it's your family's water supply. There are things you can probably do yourself, disinfecting a well, but when it comes to actually dealing with some of the major issues you could have, if you need a new pump, some of those things, fixing the service line, you really should rely on a professional to do that. They're licensed and bonded, and you can make sure that they're in good standing with the state, all those things. And so that's just one best practice I want to mention up front. Every state except 2 have a guide like this. These are Minnesota's rules, and Minnesota's well program is governed by their Department of Health. And so you can find everything you need to know about what drillers have to do, the rules they have to follow. In every state but 2, they have to be licensed, and they have to maintain their license by taking classes. They have to pass a test to even get a license. Now, I've had several people contact me from Pennsylvania saying, we have drillers have to have a license. Well, they have to pay for a license. There is no test. There is no continuing education. On their state's website, it says specifically that having a drilling license in Pennsylvania does not mean that the person with the license knows what they're doing. And so, yeah, it is what it is. But why their state legislature hasn't passed rules to require, a given level of knowledge for a driller, especially when it's so important and how it could contaminate somebody else's well or a lot of people's well or an aquifer that might be supplying communities, is beyond me. So for basic well care, really it's about keeping the area around your well clear and making sure your well cap, if you have one, if it's not a large diameter well, this example is a typical cap. There's a gasket there. If you're in a climate that freezes, after a few years, that gasket will become brittle. You hear all kinds of stories about people with Folgers cans and things on their well cap, but you never hear anybody talking about changing the gasket on their well cap. It's an important thing to do in a cold climate, especially. Many of the wells that I've taken the cap off of is either the gasket's broken into a bunch of pieces or whatever, but it's not doing its job and it's not properly sealed anymore. Things that are required by law in a lot of states are like a minimum of 12 or 18-inch stick up. So that way, if there's flooding near the well, it's not going to go over top the cap. And if that's an issue, that's something that needs to be dealt with. We have some wells in Illinois that I've run across where it may stick up 8 feet because they are in a bottom ground area right near a stream or a river, and they've put casing all the way up high enough that when there's a flood, that the top of the well doesn't get overtopped. And so, there's a lot of ways to deal with those things. The annulus is the area between when you drill a well, the borehole may be 7 inches, let's say 7 5/8, and you might be putting in a 6-inch or a 5-inch casing. So the area outside the well casing that's still open because the borehole was bigger is called the annulus. That's meant to, most states have rules that say you have to seal that with grout, which is a mixture of cement and or clay, so that, there's no way for things to run down the outside of the casing to get down into the aquifer, into your well. And so you should inspect your well, make sure that it's, the one thing that's wrong with this picture is that it doesn't show the ground is mounded up around the well, and a best practice would be to have the ground at the well a little higher than the surrounding area, even a few inches, so that when there is a heavy rainstorm, water's running away from the well and not actually ponding at the, if there's an indentation or anything where you put in this well. And so, yeah, and don't store things near the well. Don't tie your dog to it. If it's PVC like this is, when I was a kid and we had a big yard and I lived out in the country, I would hit posts with the mower, all kinds of things. If we had a well sticking up like that in our yard, I guarantee you I would have hit it a few times with a mower when I'm trying to go too fast. PVC casing can be cracked fairly easily after it's been in the ground for a while. And that's an opportunity for things to get in the well, either liquid or, things like ants or other things. So it's good to inspect it and make sure that everything looks good and it's the bolts are tight. I can't tell you how many wells I've been to where there's supposed to be 5 bolts and there's 3 or 2 or none. It's just sitting on there. And so, maintaining your wellhead. One example, I know Madison County, New York had a grant from CDC to do some well testing, and they actually noted all the wells that had bad caps. Either they weren't properly on there, or sometimes they were missing, or they had things like a Folgers can instead. And when they did their testing for coliform E. coli, there was a totally positive correlation between the wells that were contaminated with bacteria and those that had a poor cap, not a properly sealed cap. So it does matter, and it's that simple. Also, I use Minnesota as an example again. Minnesota's got a great health department. They do a lot of above and beyond what you see in other states as far as working with their well owners. They also have regional staff that help well owners, which most states don't have the capacity to do. This is from their well construction code. These are all setbacks. So every state has setbacks, like your septic system has to be so far from the well, livestock has to be so far from the well. If you're constructing a new well, I just use this one because it's a nice visual and you can see all the things that can affect your well that you might not even be concerned. Grave, obviously, septic tanks, even a swimming pool. If it's got any kind of leak and you're putting chemicals in there, you can, affect things. It says 3 feet for a building or building overhang. You have to be able to get into your well sometimes, whether your pump fails, if it's a submersible pump, or for whatever reason. And I've seen wells in basements, in kitchens, in under garages, or they build an addition and just buried the well. One person in Illinois actually cut their well off below land surface because they wanted to put a garage over their well, and they did that and then put a concrete pad down. So if anything goes wrong with their well, they will never be able to get to it unless they're going to get rid of their garage. I mean, it's just sometimes people aren't thinking. A well has a useful life just like every other type of thing that we have, like a car or whatever. So it's important to understand all the things that could matter, and so that's why those are there. As far as septic systems, we have a webinar we usually do every July just on septic systems, and so I encourage you to watch that video. We record those like we're recording the video this today, but I'll talk a little bit about septic systems because it certainly is a big part of basic well care. And this shows a diagram. There's a 2-compartment tank coming from the home. The solids either fall out or they float, and then that water moves on through, and as more comes in, then it gets pushed out into the soil absorption field, your septic field. And so it's important what you do with your septic system. Understand when it gets full, all those issues to properly maintain it. We see septic systems that last 80 to 100 years, but if you don't take care of it, you don't pump it every so often when it needs it, you can either affect the tank or more likely the drain field. And a drain field can be a pretty big area. You may not have a lot of property to put in a second drain field if this one gets plugged. And so it's really important that you maintain and take care of it. So to do that, maintain the area around your tank and drain field. You should know where the inspection port is and be able to get in there so that somebody can pump it. You should only have grass, no trees, concrete, or asphalt. If you're running heavy equipment over your drain field, you're compacting the soil, and that makes it less permeable for infiltration, and so it can make it fail faster or make water. Instead, at some point, it may start coming up instead of going down. If you've ever dealt with a septic field where all of a sudden the grass starts getting much greener, or even the ground is soft, that's because your septic field is on its way out, if you will. It's not able to let water infiltrate from the drain field lines. It's not going down like it should, and so eventually, that'll pond in your yard, or if it backs up and plugs up, it'll plug up and back up into your home. So you don't have to be super conservative with the flow of water into your septic system, but you should really try to reduce flow where you can, where it makes sense. You shouldn't have sumps go into your septic, or whirlpools, or softener backwash. That's just a big load on your septic system. A septic system works because of the bacteria in our bodies that are in the tank. They break down all the material that comes in, and they need time to do that. So if there's too much water running through, they don't have that time, and so it can start having solids plug up things there. As far as another best practice is only put wastewater into your septic system. So only your shower, your toilets, your sink, no paint, pills. It's easy to take what leftover medicine and throw it in the toilet and flush it. But if you think about it, if it's amoxicillin or something else that's supposed to kill bacteria, and you put that in your septic system, it's going to affect the bacteria in your septic tank. And so none of those things should be in there. And one note about garbage disposals, that material, even though you've broke it up with the garbage disposal into smaller particles, they're still like, pieces of tomato or carrots or whatever it might be. they're still too big for the bacteria to break down very fast. So they end up being part of the solids that fall down to the bottom, and they fill up your tank a lot faster. The rule of thumb is if you have a garbage disposal on, and you're using a septic system, if you should pump it every 2 to 3 years based on the size and number of people in your home, then you should reduce that in half. So instead of 2 years, it'd be 1, or instead of 4, it'd be 2, just because it's going to fill up that much faster. And so you should inspect the tank or have someone inspect the tank to measure solids. And if you've never done that and have no idea, have someone come out and pump your tank, or measure the tank, then pump it, and then have them come back next year and measure the tank again. And what we're measuring is the amount of solids in your tank, and that'll give you an idea how fast it's going to fill up. I think the rule of thumb is around when it gets to 60%, you should pump it. And again, that depends on the size of your tank, the number of people in your home. All those things affect how those work. And where they're starting to see more issues are with places like Airbnbs, where it was a small home. There were 2 people living there. Someone bought it, and now there's 6 people there every weekend, or for weeks at a time. It's not meant for that. It's probably a smaller tank, and we see where some of those they back up and cause problems for people. The one place you can go for a lot of really good information is EPA's septic webpage. It's just epa.gov/septic. They've got, we just had Septic Smart Week a few weeks ago. We highlighted that a lot because this website has a lot of great resources for homeowners and others. You can learn about more advanced systems. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can learn about your type of septic system and how it works and all those things in a lot more detail. And if you're a professional, there's information here for toolkits, for outreach, to help people understand how important a septic system is to not only the septic side of things, but also your drinking water and well side of things. So, and there's even a diagram on what happens. Oh, this is a good diagram if I show it. Let me see if I get here. Yeah. So this is showing the groundwater flow direction in an aquifer down below, where above that, the water table could be going a different way if the land were sloped a different direction. But if, even if your drain field is on the opposite side of your house from your well, if the groundwater flow direction is there and the soil is such that some of that material can get down in the groundwater fairly quickly, then it could be affecting your well. And so there's just a lot of helpful information on their website. And I mentioned already advanced systems. So in places where there may be vulnerable aquifers, or there may not be enough space for a septic field, then you might need an advanced treatment system that's more like a treatment system that a community would use, but on a smaller scale. They remove nitrates, they treat the water before it's discharged. And so there's all the information about those advanced systems on here. And you're starting to see more states require those in areas like where there's karst or bedrocks at the surface, and that's the aquifer. If you're in the Chesapeake Bay area, for instance, there's a lot of extra rules in those states to help try to keep it clean. And they've had a lot of success actually in that respect by using some of these advanced technologies. They really work. They're expensive, and they can be more to maintain. They've got a bunch of webcasts that are available on different things. Even, the one thing I should mention, I guess, is the Farm Bill, the latest Farm Bill, when it was passed in 2020, changed. They had, USDA had a program to fund, help low-income well owners fund replacement or treatment and things like that. They added septic systems to that list, if you will. So now that same program can also fund replacement of a septic system. So some of that information is available through here. We actually have a webinar we do every year and a half or 2 years on funding for wells. That includes like how to abandon wells where there might be funding and some of those things. We're going to do that in January and have the person from USDA actually give a presentation on our webinar. So you can look for that. It's not up on our webpage yet, but we plan to do that funding webinar next January. As far as testing, you should test your well every year for coliform nitrate, and you do that um, to understand if there's any breach in your well or if your well's not properly sealed. If you have elevated nitrate or you have any bacteria, that likely means there's a pathway into your well from the surface. And so that's why when we say test annually, and I'll go over this more in a minute, it's really for just coliform nitrate. And then other things every 3 to 5 years, which again, I'll get to. But also, anytime the well's been opened, if you have a change in taste, odor, or color, you notice something different about your water, then it's always worth testing to make sure that that there's not something going on. So what do you test for? It really depends on your situation. I'm going to provide you a list of what we recommend for everyone. But if you live in a different part of the country, you may have different issues. Some states have arsenic, some areas don't. Some have, radium, some don't. The best thing to do is understand what formation, the geologic formation your water is coming from. Talk to your state or USGS or your DEQ or whatever they might be called, the folks that make water quality maps in your state or groundwater maps. They're more than willing to help you, and you should just find out who that is. You can just Google, my state geology or water quality, and these agencies will come up. Just give them a call. Tell me, I live here. I have these. I'm just concerned. I want to test my water. Do you know of anything going on? And they'll route you to the right person. And there are places where there's known contaminants in an area. And I always use Tazewell County, Illinois, because there's a lot of arsenic, naturally occurring arsenic in that county. And so I know the Tazewell County Health Department, anytime someone asks them what they should sample for, they give them a list of inorganics and metals and definitely include arsenic. And then, a bunch of other things as well. So you should ask for advice first. So from someone who's qualified. And then, your state well records, folks, you can start with them. If you just Google my state water well records or water well logs, excuse me. The agency that houses your logs will come up. They're a good place to start. And again, Co-op Extension is also in your county. It's likely a good place too. I mentioned coliform and nitrate already, so I'll go past that. Here's just some examples of states that have gone beyond or have information up for well owners. Massachusetts DEP, they know almost all the state uses bedrock for their water supply. And so they've identified that there's both arsenic and uranium in different areas based on the type of rock. And so they've created this map. You can zoom in, but if you enter your address, it'll just tell you whether you're at risk for arsenic or uranium contamination, and that you should definitely then test for those. Boy, excuse me for a second. This might be a long day if I'm already going to have these issues. So that's one example. This is Rhode Island Department of Health's website. I found this map. All the little dots are where there used to be orchards, and there's arsenic contamination in the soil. And many times that's eventually percolated down and got into the water table or an aquifer. And so they're just making people aware. But that big splotch that's in the middle, it covers about a third of the state, is where there's high levels of beryllium. Until I found this on their webpage, I had no idea beryllium was a regulated contaminant, but it is. It has health effects. And so community water supplies are required by the Safe Drinking Water Act to limit the amount of beryllium in their water. So any community that's in this area, if they have elevated beryllium, they have to treat to remove it. It's the only area I know of in the country with elevated beryllium, although there probably are others. I just haven't ran across them. But if you're a private well owner and you're in this area, you're on your own to test for beryllium, but you should. And that's why I mention all the time, talk to your county health department or local health district. Ask your state health agency or the folks that do water quality, groundwater quality mapping. Find out what might be there before you do your testing, because it may end up there's something odd, in my opinion, like beryllium that you need to test for, where I wouldn't recommend that to anyone else in the country. Okay, so and as we get more advanced, this is a mapping program that's on the web. from Wisconsin DNR. They regulate both community water supplies and private wells, and they've had the University of Stevens Point create this educational tool, really. But what I did is I clicked on the top right, I clicked on arsenic by county, and so it's showing me the average value of arsenic in each of these counties based on the test results that Wisconsin DNR has in their database. And you can see near Green Bay, there's 3 counties that are red, which means the average arsenic concentration of a sample that they've got there is over 21. The health standard for a community water supply that they have to serve, they can't have a limit higher than 10. So that means all the yellows and oranges are above that. And that's just the average for the samples they've done. It doesn't mean that every well is contaminated there or that you're going to find any arsenic in any particular well, but it should be a red flag that you need to test for it. And they have this for a bunch of different chemicals. It's actually pretty handy. It'd be great if every state had something similar. Okay, so this is what we recommend. Again, coliform and nitrate annually, not because, so coliform isn't the harmful bacteria, it's E. coli. E. coli is a strain of coliform bacteria. And nitrate, is harmful for babies and pregnant women and blue baby syndrome, but it's not regulated for adults. And so you can drink water with coliform and nitrate as an adult and it shouldn't harm you based on what the EPA says. But we test for them because they're so ubiquitous in the surface environment that if they show up in your well, it likely means that you have a breach somewhere, that either a crack in the casing or the annulus isn't properly sealed or you don't have a good cap or whatever. And so that's why it's important to test for that every year. It just gives you peace of mind that your well integrity is still there. And then we also recommend the series of inorganics and metals. They give you a good general chemistry of your well. If you have galvanized piping in your home or in your drop pipe for your pump, then we recommend testing for zinc and cadmium, for instance, as well as lead. But this is kind of our list, what we came up with, and we shared this with a lot of folks and everyone seems to agree. There's obviously other things you can test for, but you're hitting the main ones by doing this. And it also provides a way for a chemist, like Walt Kelly I mentioned is a groundwater geochemist, to look at all this information and get a good idea of other things about your water, how hard it is and, what's going to happen if you treat it a certain way and things like that. But again, always get advice from your local or state health department before you do any sampling and find out if there's anything else you should sample for in addition. So as far as where to get it analyzed, we recommend an accredited lab, so a certified lab. So for the Safe Drinking Water Act, communities have to have water samples collected every 3 months, and they have to be sampled or analyzed by a accredited lab. Every state has an accreditation program. You can go on your state's website, your state primacy agency, which is the agency that regulates community water supplies, and find a list of all the labs that they certify or accredit, if you will. And then I would use one of those just because they have to go through a bunch of extra hoops and show that they know what they're doing using the right methods in order to even get accredited. And so you're assured a little better quality. When you talk to a lab, they should be able to give you all the details you need. If you need to store the sample in a fridge or put an ice pack in, if it needs preservatives, which most people don't do anymore, they're usually acid, and give you information on how to get those back to the lab, whether that's shipping it overnight or whatever. If they can't answer your questions, I'd find a different lab. And I tell labs that all the time, that they need a person who can help well owners. If they don't have someone who understands the issues well owners have, then you should find this lab that does. And so I missed the second bullet here. Some states have programs for private well sampling. I know Iowa has a grants to counties program where the state legislature gives money to each of the county health departments in order to help subsidize both sampling and well abandonment. And so you can check and see if any of those are going on. I know one of the questions today was from someone in Colorado, and I reached out to a colleague in Jefferson County, Colorado, and he mentioned that they have free well testing that you can apply for. They have so much money every year they set aside for that. So it's worth asking, depending on where you live. There may be a program out there that would make your sampling a lot cheaper, or at least give you some basic information. And the lab should also be able to provide all the information you need, as well as the bottles, and tell you how to go about it and have good sampling instructions and, all those things. As far as interpreting results, there are websites out there, and I'm going to show you one about where you can type in your results and it'll tell you what it means. But you should still always take your results to your health department, local, probably, and get a qualified answer. Ask them what does this mean? If it's over an MCL, I will mention, so MCL means maximum contaminant level. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires every community water supply to test, and their water has to be below the MCL for all the constituents that are listed in the Safe Drinking Water Act, like arsenic or radium or anything else. And so if your sample's over that as a private well owner, it doesn't mean you can't drink it. We have folks here in Tazewell County who drink water that's got arsenic at over 50 parts per billion when the standard is 10. And their argument is, I've drank this my whole life. My dad lived here and lived till he was 86. That's their business. And it's same for you. It's your business as a well owner, whether or not you take that seriously or not. We would recommend you don't drink that water or you treat it, but it's up to you. No one's going to tell you can't drink your water. And I say that because that's always been the rules, if you will. Now, we do have a few counties and local health districts in the Northeast where they've created their own rules. So for instance, there is a health district in Connecticut where they can condemn a well. That's the only one I know of. There are there's a county in New York that requires testing a property transfer, and the state of Rhode Island now has passed a law that with property transfer, you have to test the well, and if it doesn't meet all the MCLs from the Safe Drinking Water Act, you have to remediate that, or a building inspector can consider condemning the property. So in those cases, you want to know that information before you share your results, just to protect your, the value of your property and all those things. But you can always just call first and ask, do you have any authority if I share my results with you to condemn my well? If they do, then maybe find somebody else. And that's, you gotta, again, I understand the private well owner side of this. It's important though that you have someone interpret your results that knows what they're doing. And yeah, so that's all I'll say about that. And if you have bacteria, and you only test it for coliform, then I would get a test for E. coli, make sure there's no E. coli in your water. And until you do that, you should boil your water, and you should also chlorinate your well, shock chlorinate your well to get rid of it if it can. We'll get on that too. So New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services created this tool called the Be Well Informed Guide. And I share this because it's done by a state agency, it's funded by CDC, and it's actually a really nice tool to get an idea of what your sample results are. So if you go to this page, you can Google, Be Well Informed Guide. Down at the bottom left, there's an enter your water test results. So if you click on that, it gives you all this stuff to fill out, but at the very top right, it asks you what town you're from. And that's, if you're from New Hampshire, I encourage you to put your town in there, because a lot of communities in New Hampshire are all private wells. They don't have a public water supply, and it helps the DES know more about what the water quality is in your state. And that's a really important thing that we'd all like to know for our states. If we have better data, we know what kind of issues we're dealing with in certain areas. It helps us do a better job of outreach and education to all the well owners in those areas. But you can use this no matter what state you're in. You just put anonymous. And so I typed in 15 for micrograms per liter, which is the same as ppb, or technically the same. The nice thing about this is that it lets you pick your units. There's a drop down. So many times labs report things in specific units, like they might report arsenic in parts per million or milligrams per liter, which in case at 15 would be 0.015. And so being able to put it in the units that the lab gave you saves on conversion error. Some of the older versions of these types of tools required it to be milligrams per liter. And when you're working with arsenic or some other things where they report it and maybe in a different unit, you have to know what those are and how to convert it. And that's a problem. So to me, that's one big advancement that's happened with this tool. And so then I put in 15, which the standard is 10. I already mentioned that. So if I click submit, it tells me I get a red X saying that 0.01, which is 10 micrograms per liter, is the standard for a public water system. And it even tells you the type of treatment that'll work, either absorptive media or RO will work. Point of use means like at your kitchen tap versus point of entry, which would be in your house. And so there's a lot of good information that goes along with this. Then again, I would take all of this information, including this result, to a qualified health person to ask them what you should do next. As you go down, it talks about the different standard treatment options. I will mention, I think I do in one of the questions as well, but down the third gray box says an NSF ANSI standard 53 certified carbon absorption media filter system. So there are third-party certifiers that test treatment equipment to make sure it does what it says it does or what the company claims it does. I would not buy any treatment equipment that isn't NSF ANSI certified, either by, there's 3 certifying bodies, and I'll talk about that in the questions, so I'll let that go till then. But it means that that equipment was tested by an independent body, and they found that it does actually remove what they say it'll remove. And so they're certified for every different constituent. So like an RO unit takes out dozens of different constituents in water. It'll tell you which ones it's certified for based on the actual RO unit and the company that made it. And that just gives you peace of mind. When you look at treatment equipment online in any given website that lists a lot of treatment equipment, you might see for a particular type of unit, the range is from $200 to over $1,000 for the same type of equipment. The ones that are in the lower end of that are all going to be not certified in all likelihood, which means it's kind of pot luck whether or not they actually do what they say they'll do. Anything with that seal, gold seal from like WQA or UL, Underwriters Lab, or NSF, the National Sanitation Foundation, anything with their labels on it means that they've tested it and they have approved it as removing those constituents. Okay, so again, these tools are only a guide for typical water. There's weird things that happen to groundwater sometimes. We've seen groundwater that had a pH of 12 and has its own special type of bacteria that had never been seen before up in northern Illinois. Why that happened, I couldn't tell you, but my point is you should always take it to a health professional and not rely just on what you find online. And as I mentioned earlier, they cannot tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well. They can only recommend it. And that's true in 99% of the country. And again, if you're concerned about that, if you're in the Northeast, you can always call your local health district and ask them what their legal rules are and what authority they have. And they will let you know. But in the case of states like Connecticut and Massachusetts, right now, the rules are all put together by the local health district. So you can have one health district that has the ability to condemn a well and they require testing at property transfer, and the next community over, their health district may have no rules whatsoever. So you could literally move across the street and all of a sudden the rules related to your well are totally different, which is really a poor way to do things because it doesn't equally protect well owners around their state or around the country for that matter. As far as treatment, there are 2 reasons why we treat our water. Usually it's either health effects or cosmetic issues or taste. And so a lot of people, I've run into a number of folks who have $4,000 or $5,000 worth of water treatment equipment in their basement, And I'm like, oh, what was in your well water? They say they never tested their well. Um, you don't need it if you don't need it. And if you don't test first to understand what your water quality is, you may not need anything. You know, a lot of groundwater is perfectly safe. It's got a mineral taste, a really good taste to it because it's got some mineralogy because it's in the ground. And, you know, you don't need to add treatment just because you think you do, or some salesman comes by and does a pH test and, you know, for all kinds of stories. One, if you're going to work with a treatment professional, I would work with one that's certified through the Water Quality Association, that's passed their tests. And I'd also, you know, do your homework and find out from your state or others um, if, you know, if there's been any complaints against them or anything like that. Because sometimes, you know, people in the trying to sell things may exaggerate. There's even a paper by Penn State about how to deal with those things. But just for instance, if you know you've tested and you have arsenic issues, you already know there's really two ways to treat that, RO or a filter. And if they try to sell you something else, then you'd know. That's why you need to be informed. And I want to mention, I've run across a lot of folks who end up putting in a whole house system, either that RO unit or something else like to remove arsenic. Arsenic is not an issue except drinking water. You can shower in it, all those things. It's not a health risk except in your drinking water. So there'd never be a reason to put in a whole house RO unit or filter to remove arsenic. And if someone tries to sell you that, send them to us, honestly, because I've seen too many of those. And you know, the difference between a whole house system and a system on your kitchen sink is probably 10 or 20 fold in expense. Instead of $500 or $600, it's going to be 5,000 or 6,000 or more. And then you also deal with the upkeep and maintenance is that much more expensive. And if you're in an area where there's low water availability, like say you're in the Rockies in Colorado, where your well may only pump a few gallons a minute, RO takes 5 gallons of water for every gallon you actually get to drink. It wastes a lot. And so you don't want to use those things unless you really need them. Okay. Oh, well, it looks like I got ahead of myself. There's very few cases where I'd recommend whole house treatment. And again, yeah, I won't read this, but it'll be in the video if you want to read all this. And yeah, if they ask, like, the last sentence is the important one. If someone recommends whole house, find out why. It's usually a waste of money and water. And I think I've already mentioned that. So if you have any kind of treatment, the biggest message is maintenance and replacement. If there's a schedule that comes with it for like replacing a filter, whatever it might be, follow it. You may think, oh, well, yeah, the company wants me to buy 5 cartridges this year. Do it, is the bottom line. So one of the folks from Minnesota that I worked with early on when we started this program, you know, in 2013, I had them review the private well class lessons, and one of their regional staff actually recommended that we don't include anything about treatment at all. And I said, well, why would we not want to tell well owners how to do these sorts of things or understand, you know, what an RO unit is versus a softening unit and what they do? He said, because I run into more systems that aren't maintained that become the source of contamination for their water than I do those that are actually taken care of properly. And so take note of that, because if you add treatment, there's probably a cost for replacing cartridges or whatever it might be. And you need to be strict about doing that, because especially a filter, well, not especially, but an example is a filter. If you don't change that filter, eventually the water is going to bypass it, but it's also a media where bacteria can grow. And so those filters, if those cartridges aren't changed properly, you're eventually going to create a water quality issue with bacteria with your filter. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the private well class. This is the front page. It's just privatewellclass.org. And again, when you go here, if this webinar is a small piece of what you'll learn by taking the class. It's 10 lessons. It's really simple. You click on Take Our Free Class. It takes you to a page where it asks for your first name, what state you live in, and your email address. And that's just the email address is so we can send it to you. We send it once a week for 10 weeks. We send a different PDF to you. And what state you live in is so that we can show the US EPA, who funds this, that we're actually reaching well owners all over the country. And that's really it. If you want to learn more or you want us to be more engaged with you, you can email us and give us more information. But that's really up to you. And so we also have videos, which many of those are these webinars, as well as some other videos I'll mention in a minute. But it's really worthwhile to take the class because it's a PDF. You can have it on your computer. You can always refer to it. But it's important to read through it. I think you'll learn a lot about how your well works and where your water comes from and why it's important to take care of it and do all the things like testing that you need to. Yeah, so here's when you click on take our free class, it asks for your email address, your first name, and where you live. And that's a drop down that just lists states. We've also had people from a lot of countries take our class and sign up. I think we're up a little over 10,000 people that have signed up for the class now in the last 7 years or so. Along with each lesson, like the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater. We have extra resources from other folks, National Groundwater Association, Iowa Geological Survey, Cornell University. That Cornell University one, those guys, those are all from the late 80s, but they're so well done. The two Raymond Lyle ones, the third and fourth one, I recommend everybody take a look at that. It's really explains things well, common language. We used a couple of figures out of there in the lesson, in fact. And so for each lesson, there's additional reading, if you will. If you have specific issues, like for groundwater and well contamination, the first one there is the Michigan Flowing Well Handbook. Michigan DEQ, which is now called Eagle, their agency name, developed this because they were losing 28 million gallons of water a day to flowing wells. So they put a well in the ground, it would be flowing. It just naturally, the pressure in the well and the aquifer is higher than the land surface. And so that makes the well flow naturally. And so now they cap those to protect that water supply. And it's a rule in the state that you have to have a capped well if it's going to flow. And that handbook, though, has tons of great information about flowing wells if you happen to have one, for instance. And there are different places around the country where that occurs. The webinars like today's, we record every one of them. And so this is a webinar on groundwater and well construction 101. It's under our webinars and events. You can get to our videos if you click on past webinars, and they're all listed. And again, you can find the webinar today is Well Owner 101. You can find the one from last April and the November before that. And the material is basically the same for where we're at today. But when we get to the questions, those are always different. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is you can look at each webinar, each video, and skip to the section where we start answering people's questions. And you're going to see a lot of different questions over the course of 3 or 4 months on different topics that maybe have been addressed before or haven't. We get asked every month about how to disinfect your well, so we include that most of the time. But other questions we may have never got before, and we try to answer those so that there's a record of all that stuff. I mentioned the funding and financing one. The last time we did that was in October of 2020. Again, we are going to do that again and updated with the stuff about septic systems, including having someone from USDA speak on what that program is today, and has changed since 2020. And so, but it also lists information from specific states and other things where there might be good information available that might help you cost share, getting an abandoned well sealed, or whatever it might be. We did 2 webinars on lead after all the big lead issues that came out after 2014. And this one from 2018 is the last time we've done this. Everything is in this video. We had Dr. Kelsey Piper from Northeastern University speak. She's a lead and private wells expert. And we asked her to come in and show us the research she'd done as far as, she was working in North Carolina and Virginia at the time. And because of their aquifer, the water's already low pH and fairly corrosive. And so they see a lot more lead issues there than you do like in Illinois, where our pH of our groundwater in most places is over 7.5. There's places in Virginia where it's less than 5.5. And so it's interesting the work she done. It's all there. And we also created a lead page. I'll get to that in a second. I always mention our septic systems because we do that once a year, usually in July. This year it was in August because we had to cancel the July one. But if I don't have it on here, I guess I don't. I'm going to back up. We have a page. If you just go to privatewellclass.org/lead, there's a series of resources on that page, even talking about the filters that remove lead at your kitchen tap. The EPA did a bunch of testing on different filters and found some of them are really good. The way the state, well, they remove a lot of arsenic or a lot of lead, and so they do a good job of making water safe. And so if you're interested in that, you can go to that page. We also have a series of training videos. This says 16, there's actually 21 now. I just used an old image, but like, why does my well keep losing pressure? Or there's a similar one about how does my pressure tank work? It's probably had, well, I know it's had over 450,000 views. And what that tells us is a lot of people have pressure problems with their well water. And that's, it could be the pressure switch isn't set to the right place. It could be a lot of things, undersized tank, but there's just information available. It's on one topic. It's 4 to 7 minutes long. And there's 21 of those, what to do after a fire. Someone asked that today. Things like that. What is a sand and gravel aquifer versus, what is a bedrock aquifer? And just, it answers one specific question. Even what is an artesian aquifer? Most people don't understand that artesian does not mean it flows. So that's just the way it is. Okay, so the whole point of our program overall is to, as a well owner, we want you to understand where your water is coming from. So you need to understand your log if you have one, how to find your log if you don't have it, if it might be available. And that depends. We find even in Illinois, where we passed a law in 1968 requiring well logs to be filed, we still only probably have about half to 60% of all the well logs that are out there. Other states that started much later in the game, like New York, may only have 10% of all the wells logs for the wells they have. And so finding your well log in New York is probably much less likely. But understanding those things, how deep is your well? What geologic unit is it in? Do you have a screen or not? Where's your pump set? Is your pump submersible in the well, or is it at the surface? And what those things mean? If you have naturally occurring contaminants, all those things. So by going through the class lessons and participating in these webinars, it'll help you when you have an issue, learn to ask the right questions and better questions, and also understand where your local sources of information are. And I say that because I get questions from people all over the country now. They'll call me and say, well, I have this issue or that issue. Many times, if they would have just done the lessons first, they would already know where to get that help, or they would already know the answer to that question. And the whole point is, most people are reactive and they don't think about their well until they have a problem. We're trying to teach everyone to be proactive and understand that if you take the time to learn more about your well and how it works and all those things, you may not only save yourself a bunch of time, but also a bunch of money by understanding how to take care of it. And then lastly, and most importantly, is to continue to sample your well. That's the only way you know what your water quality is, and it's important to do that regularly. Yeah, so again, the goal of our program is to help you understand why your well is important, why you need to understand how it works, and then how that helps you protect yourself and your family from risk. Yeah, so this says 40 plus questions. I took this from another slide deck, I guess, because we had a lot more than that for today, close to 100. So I apologize for not catching that. Oh, I see what it says here. Many of the 40 plus questions you'll ask when you registered are answered in the class lessons. A number of them are, that's for sure. And if you had gone through the class or started going through the class, you'd already, it's a question you wouldn't have had to ask today. So as far as the submitted questions, we're to that portion. I think I answered about 17 to 20 or so. And again, I apologize to Katie. I didn't change the slide. I didn't catch that this morning. Jennifer is not with us today. Katie was gone for this last time in April, probably somewhere warm and fun. But she's been taking your questions through the chat box. It looks like we have 3. And so we'll answer those at the very end. And if more questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat or the question box. So these are some of the questions we got in advance. Is there a way to reduce the acidity in RO water besides a post-alkaline filter? So just so everyone's aware, what an RO unit does, reverse osmosis, is it takes out a lot of things in water. Most of the mineralogy that helps buffer the water to keep it at a higher pH. So what we see is when you use an RO unit, the water going in may be at 7.5, and like if it's in Illinois, and it may come out at 6.5 or less. And so RO units typically lower the pH, which is making it more acidic, and that can lead to issues because it's more corrosive. And so that's where you start seeing lead or copper leaching from lead or copper pipes or lead solder and some of those issues. So the only way to raise the pH is after you've taken that stuff out to put some of it back in. And so whether that be an alkaline filter or injection, I looked this up because it's not my area per se, but if you Google water treatment pH adjustment, extension, the Cooperative Extension Service has a drinking water web page called drinkingwaterextension.org. And in that, they have a lot of detailed information about both, and they don't say alkaline filters, I can't remember the term they used, but basically they raise the pH, or you can inject things like lime into your water to help raise the pH. So there are ways to do that, and they provide that information. And this is the link. You can email us too, and we can provide this to you after the webinar. Okay, so I wasn't sure how to take this because it said tools, but I'll tell you how I took it. What water testing tools do you recommend to test the raw water from the well as as point of use? So I took that to mean, what water testing do you need to do at the well versus at your tap, the point of use, in order to have a better idea of your water quality or whatever. So, because I guess the tool would be testing, right? Taking a water sample. So we often suggest that a well owner sample at both places, both at your kitchen sink, where it's your drinking water, and at an outside spigot that you know is before, or a hydrant, where you know it's before any kind of treatment and it's straight from the well. And that's because well water, the groundwater, could be much different than the water coming out of your kitchen tap because of pipes, because of treatment. If you have a softener, filter, RO, whatever you might have, all change the chemistry of the water, so it's going to look different. In fact, whenever our lab gets a sample and someone sends it and says, oh, this is from an outside spigot before any treatment, we can tell if the water's been softened, right? And so we know, nope, this is not. Either that or their spigot is actually coming back out of the house after the softener, which would be really odd. So what we recommend is collect 2 samples, and you should take the first one from the kitchen tap before you do anything else. And that's where you're going to, when you're getting water for cooking or, filling up a pot to put water in, you're just turning that on. You're not waiting 5 minutes necessarily or doing anything else or letting it run for 20 minutes. You're just getting water from your kitchen sink and you're using it. So collect your water sample for your kitchen tap that way, because that's the water you're most likely to drink. And so then you understand your drinking water quality. For your outside spigot or hydrant, we recommend turn on the hydrant, let it run for 15 or 20 minutes, or if you hear the pump kick on your well, if you're that close, then wait a few minutes after that. Now you know the water coming out of the hydrant is not sitting in the well, it's not sitting in a pipe where it may have leached some kind of metal. It's actually fresh groundwater that's coming through the pump and coming up through the system. And then take that second sample. And that way, we have a good idea of the actual groundwater quality versus, the water that you're drinking in your home. The groundwater, one, they are significantly different in most cases, and I'll show you an example, but also it's better for us or anyone to understand what your drinking water quality is doing and why it's the way it is if we also know what the raw water quality coming in the home was. And, for most folks, that would be paying for 2 samples, and I get that. It's still the best way to learn and understand what's going on with your water quality. And so that's what we try to recommend to folks. So I'm going to show you an example. This is a home that's near Champaign, Mahomet, Illinois. That's on a private well. It's in the Mahomet Aquifer, which is a deep sand and gravel aquifer here. It's below 200 feet below land surface. So this is the raw water sample. Sodium's at 25.9. The turbidity and the color and the pH are all high. pH of 8, neutral 7. And the hardness is really high. It's 351. So this person has a filter and a softener. So they collected a sample outside their house, and this is the sample results. And then they collected a sample after the filter and the softener. So you can see the sodium went from 25 to 198. They're using regular softener salt, which is sodium chloride, and that's raised the amount of sodium in their drinking water. So if you're on a low sodium diet, here's an unintended consequence of softening your water. If someone really had a sodium issue, their doctor may recommend they go to potassium chloride for their softener salt instead of sodium for that reason. But look what it did. The turbidity and color both went way down, so the filter and helped with that. And the pH basically stayed the same, 8.02 versus 8.1. And the hardness went from 351 down to 0.68. So their softener is really doing its job, right? And so that's how different the chemistry is, though. Well, then they also have an RO unit on their kitchen tap. So when we look at that, those less than arrows all mean it's below detection limit for our lab. And you can see there's a lot more of these arrows for one thing, which means it took a lot of stuff out. Even the sodium was up to 198. Now it's at 6.24. So it took out, 90%, 95% of the sodium. And but look what it did to the pH. So we are talking about what an RO unit does. The pH went from 8.1 down to 6.23, but that's just at the kitchen tap where the RO unit is. And so that's another reason why having a whole house RO unit could cause you corrosion issues in your system if you're not doing something to bring the pH back up. And so there's a lot of things that can happen whenever, even just treating your water can have effects that you don't intend. And that's kind of the point, but it also dictates or explains why having 2 samples can really tell us a lot about your water quality. And so, yeah, that's it's a great example, and it's interesting how that works. Is there a home test kit that you can recommend to well owners for testing their water instead of sending it to a lab for testing? Home test kits, I'll just say things like pH and basic chemistry might be fine, but a lot of them are colorimetric or only give you a range or those sorts of things. And so, I'm colorblind, for instance, and so using a colorimetric chart doesn't work for me. That's the way it is. And depending on the kind of light you use, if you're in white light versus more yellow light or soft light, it really makes a difference on how those look. We found that out by testing some of these things a number of years ago. So we recommend that you use a certified lab because when you're what you're doing here is your sample results are going to dictate your drinking water use, and you're trying to protect your family and yourself and your health. There's a reason they're that much cheaper, and in most cases you get what you pay for, and that's just the way it is. And I will say that we haven't looked at these kits in a number of years. I mean, the arsenic stuff we did with those colorimetric kits was probably 8 or 9 years ago, and there may be some out there that are better and more effective for like screening purposes. But if you have something that shows really high of any value of something, you should still send it to a lab and find out for sure what the level is, because most of them aren't going to give you an accurate number. And it's about the risk you want to take. And if you're gonna, I would always use a certified lab. When should you call a specialist, and when can you do things on your own to take care of your well or well tank? So the whole point of our private well class, as I've already mentioned, is to give you some of the tools you need to be able to answer this question and also questions about your well and that sort of thing. So what level of knowledge do you have, or how mechanically inclined you are? All those things matter. And so it's really going to be different for different people, right? But the first step is to take a class, and it's free. It's delivered to you. There's no obligation if you choose not to read it even, but you should, and it'll give you a much better understanding of what you do and don't know about your well as far as maintaining it, and also hopefully will help you understand better when you need to actually call a contractor or a professional versus the things you can take care of yourself or learn. And so, because some of the, like the drillers associations of the world would want you to call a driller every time you have a problem. And I get that, that's their business, but not everyone can afford that. And so our job, in my opinion, is to give you the tools so that when you can do it yourself, you know how, and you can learn how to do that. So just like disinfecting your well, it's not something that you should need somebody else to do for you. But if you're uncomfortable and you have the means, obviously having a professional's going to guarantee it's done better in most cases. But yeah, that's the way it is. And we've looked through all the different instructions for shock chlorinating a well from a lot of different agencies around the country and Extension and everybody else. And honestly, the Minnesota Department of Health one, which I'll show you in a minute, is the best one. It's got step-by-step instructions. It has pictures, tells you how to mix it properly, all those things. And it's something that everyone should be able to follow. And that's why they developed that in the first place. Okay, so can you recommend scheduled maintenance? So we talked about maintenance a little bit, not a lot today, but there's more information in our class. So again, take our free class. If you go through and actually read all the material, you'll understand what things you need to do and what you should check. A well is a mechanical device, basically, or the pump is, I should say. And a lot of those things will last a long time, and your well will last a long time. But as far as protecting your water quality, that's really on you to understand what your risks are and where the sources of vulnerability are, like your well cap, and ensuring that the annulus has mounded dirt around it, and just basic things so that water can't get in your well. Don't store chemicals nearby where they can leak into the ground, near your well. All those sorts of things. And it's we go through it a lot more in our class lesson. I think there's 10 lessons. I think it's about 86 pages, including pictures total. So, on average, a lesson's 8.6 pages. Yeah, it's worth doing, is all I can tell you. So, and I'm going to summarize this because it was a really long question, but basically they put in a well, their house is still under construction, they don't expect to use the well for as much as 18 months, and they were concerned that, this is in Colorado, that the driller put the pump in and then capped the well, but they didn't test it, and should they have? And they asked if there are any state rules for that. So ICON, a lot of times when it's a state question, I don't, but I have a good contact in Jefferson County, Colorado, with the health department that we've worked with a number of times. And Jim said basically that there are no state requirements in Colorado, but there could be rules from a local agency like a local building department, or even, he didn't know of any county health departments that had a rule that required testing, even though apparently they could develop those. So, but he also shared, and what's more important for all of us, is that, local health departments, and this is all over the country, actually encourage testing, right? And some of them actually have programs to assist well owners, as well as some offer testing recommendations for their area. So it's worth contacting your county health department or local health department to find out if they offer any of that. And and so you should reach out to them. And Jefferson County actually has a free water testing program. And so if you're in Jefferson County by chance, then they have testing kits you can order, and well, they have a program. And then the state of Colorado also has testing kits through their state lab. And if you just Google water testing or homeowner water testing and CDPHE, you'll find the page where you can order those. Now you have to pay for those kits, but if you're interested in getting a sample done, that's one way to do it. And so, this is I walked through this in 20 minutes, a couple emails back and forth. This is something you can all do in your state. Find out that information. You just have to be inquisitive. And that's, one of the lessons we have, I think it's lesson 7, is how to find local information. And basically it's us describing the types of Google searches and other things you can do, how to Google things so you find the right agencies depending on what your questions are. And it's really, it's when it comes down to it, if you just Google my state water well log, you're going to find whether your state has logs, what agency has them, a phone number you can contact to talk to somebody. You have to be willing to take those steps and actually make a phone call, and you can learn a lot more about what's known. Or in some states, like in Illinois, our state geological survey has all of our well logs online. They're public information. So you can get on this GIS mapping tool, zoom into your area, click on your well if it's there, see the geology, or you can click on a neighbor's well if your well log may not be there. Like I said, we only have about 50 to 60% of the well logs for the wells that are in Illinois, but you can see what everybody else's well is nearby, and it's likely you're going to be in a similar unit. And so there's a lot of valuable tools out there. You just have to be willing to go out and look for them. How can I tell how much water is available for our well? Well, the best way is a pumping test. And that means monitoring the static water level, which before the pump's turned on, and then the pumping water level, knowing how deep it is, all those things. So I put an example from a well log here. The static water level is 130 feet. They pumped it at 25 gallons a minute for 2 hours and it dropped to 160. Now this is a 260-foot well. So given that there's 100 feet of water, the water's coming from the aquifer in the lower 50 feet of this well, given that the water level is well above that, and it only dropped 30 feet when pumping at 25 gallons per minute, which no one with a private well that's just serving a home has a 25 gallon per minute pump in their well. They probably have a 5 or a 7.5 or something like that, because you just do not need that kind of a pump. It's well oversized. This well log was actually for a campground. And so, this tells the driller that there's a lot of water available. And so, yeah, if you don't have a way, or you can't find the original log and it doesn't have this information, then you may want to, if you really want to find out, you could perform a pumping test. Or, I was trying to think about the best practices. Oregon requires now that you put a piezometer tube in your well when you construct it, which is just a 1 inch or less tube that's perforated on the bottom that comes out of your well cap. So you can take a separate measurement of the water level, and it's really handy to understand if it goes all the way to the bottom. You may try to your well may not work, your pump may be burn up or whatever because the water level dropped below the pump and it's dry. But that doesn't mean there's no more water in your well. Your well could be much deeper. Your pump isn't necessarily set at the bottom. In fact, it shouldn't be in most cases. And so having a piezometer tube would allow you to measure if there's any water in your well in that case, but you could use it for the same purpose if you're trying to do a pumping test. Let your water run from your spigot, or turn 2 or 3 faucets on at the same time, or whatever. You won't know the rate, but you can see if there's much drawdown when your pump kicks on. That's not the best way to do it. Obviously, the best way to do it is use a contractor, or a driller to do an actual pumping test. But if they do that, they'll probably have to pull your pump, put in a bigger pump, and then they'll do a test like that, like was done for this when it was first installed. And so one thing I can tell you, that if you are putting in a new well, ask that they perform a pumping test on the well, similar to this, so that you have an idea of, because there's a lot of wells, someone asked a question about a well in Granite, and, I worked with a guy that's on the western slope of the Rockies in Colorado, and his well only pumped a half a gallon a minute. Granite's pretty tight rock. It doesn't have many fractures in it, and so you don't get a lot of water out of it. A lot of times you could drill a well into granite and not get any water. And so he actually put in a cistern, and his well basically pumps 24/7 to fill up a cistern that he then pumps into his house, so he has water when he needs it. Because when he's using water, he wouldn't have enough at a half gallon a minute. And so understanding all those things and knowing what kind of well you have is certainly important, I guess is my point there. If you purchase a home and have no information about the well pump, make, model, or age, how can you determine the type of pump you have and its age to plan for potential failure and replacement? Well, you really can't without pulling the pump out of the well, assuming it's, it's obviously it's a submersible or you wouldn't be asking this question. But that's really a drastic solution. I wouldn't recommend it. It's going to cost you a fair amount of money. Well pumps, if it's a submersible pump, they're pretty durable, and literally they can last anywhere from 8 to 60 years or even more. And so it's probably best as a plan to be prepared to basically start a fund and put a little money away every month just for whenever you have a well problem. We recommend this for anyone. We especially recommend this for people who are on shared wells, so that when a pump fails and you and your neighbor share a well, one of you has $2,000 for the $4,000 bill and the other one doesn't, all of a sudden you aren't friends and neighbors anymore. And so if you have that put away, it's no different than having a water bill, right? I pay a water bill every month so that the community can provide me water. If you put a little money away so that when you have a problem with your well or you need to do your testing every year, you already have it in a spot that you can just take it out and it's not going to affect your monthly income, then you're prepared. Because it literally could be 20 years from now or more before you have a pump failure. And so you can't really plan for that. Even if you knew the well pump and when it was installed, sometimes they really surprise you. They may go out in 8 years, but again, it could last much longer than that. So one thing you could try, I thought, would be if there's a local contractor or pump installer that does a lot of the work in your area, you could contact them and see that if the previous owner had ever used them. Because if they had to do any kind of work, maybe lower the pump or whatever, then they may have some information about your pump and its age and how deep it is and all those things. But that would be the only other way. So I think you're better off assuming it's going to eventually fail and put a little money away every month or so just to be prepared for that. My well water contains sand. Any solution for this problem? So unfortunately, it's not the water that contains the sand. The sand is actually the aquifer. It's the material that makes up your aquifer. And it means that your well and the screen, which you have a well screen at the bottom of your well to keep the sand out and let the water in, and that's not happening, either because of fine sand, which sometimes it's so fine you can't do a lot about it, and that's just bad luck if you're in an aquifer that has very fine sand, or there could be some kind of breach in your screen or even in the well casing somewhere where there's a crack in it and it's letting sand in. Either way, sand is abrasive and it scours the pipes as it's with velocity, and it also scours the insides of your pump and make them less efficient, and eventually it'll make them both fail well ahead of where they should have. I have a buddy who has a well that's pumping a little sand, and an elbow in his basement, a pipe elbow, a copper pipe, failed. And we were worried it was originally worried that it was because of corrosive water, and it turns out it's because he's pumping fine sand. And so, yeah, or even the well casing itself. So in general, once a well starts pumping sand, that abrasiveness actually is going to go through the hole that's in the side of the well or in the screen as well, and it's going to open up more and continue to get worse. And a lot of times all you can do is abandon the well and put in a new one and make sure that there's a gravel pack that goes around the screen that's sized based on the sand size in the aquifer, and you can make sure that the driller does that properly. Maybe they put in the wrong size gravel pack. That doesn't usually happen because they usually use the cuttings from drilling the hole to size the screen in the gravel pack. If it could be that there's a shallower unit where there's, if it's PVC pipe especially, maybe where the pieces were put together, it's got a breach or the threads were crossed or whatever. Sometimes you can identify that if you camera the well, which, drop a camera down in the well and have it video that as you go down. That's also not cheap. And if it's not much sand, the short-term solution would be a filter. But again, that's going to get worse. And, filter cartridges aren't that expensive, but they add up. I worked with a guy who was replacing this filter every 10 or 15 days. And, it doesn't take long for all of a sudden a new well not to look like such a bad solution. If you're going to be spending money and you have to replace it and do all that, plus the damage it's doing to the pump and to the pipe before the filter is going to shorten the life of all those things as well. We live in a forest or fire country. Are there tips for better preparing wells for possible fires? Yeah, that's one of those 21 training videos. And these pictures are all from El Paso County Health Department in Colorado after a fire came through. The big thing we're trying to show in the pictures that are on here are that the well caps and the wires all melted. And so the one thing that's on this video I'll mention today is you should shut the power off to your well before you leave. Like if there's a forest fire coming towards your home, make sure the power is off to your well. Because if it's not, when that fire comes through, if it melts those wires together, they told us, El Paso County told us they had cases where their pump didn't work after they fixed everything, and it's because the wires melted together and it turned the pump on and it burned it up in the end. And so, you can get on our website and look under I think it's webinars and events tab. When you scroll over that, you'll get a thing that says past webinars. If you click on that, it takes you to our video page, and then you can click on these training videos, and there's a whole series of them. And one of them, the other thing you can do is there's a search box in the upper right corner for the website, and just type fire. And this will be one of the first things that comes up, and you can click on this and then watch the video. They're also on our YouTube channel. If you want to go, you want to see that there too, you can look up the private well class on YouTube. General questions, where's the best location for a well on your property? How deep do I need to drill to get drinking water? And what are the components of a water well? All of that's described in our class. And, like the second question there, how deep do you need to drill to get to drinking water? That's totally a local question. It really depends on the geology at your property. And there's no way to answer that on something like this. A driller that works in the area is going to have other well logs. If you're in Illinois, you could look on this tool that the Illinois State Geological Survey has, and you can look at all the other logs in your area, and you'd probably get a good idea of what unit they're getting, if it's sand and gravel, or if it's bedrock, how deep they're drilling. You can even contact us and get water quality information for wells nearby and find out, is this water going to be hard, or all those sorts of things. Do your homework first, and again, all that's explained in much more detail with more time if you sign up for the class and go through those lessons. Can soil composition affect quality? And I'm going to talk about two different soils. One is actually the soil at the surface, and the other would be the geological material in an aquifer. I'm not sure what you mean by soil composition, and if you could mean the material the aquifer is in. So just to cover our bases, I'm going to talk about both. Obviously, at the surface, if the ground is more sandy, then that allows more infiltration, which if there's any kind of water quality issues, spray, livestock, anything else nearby, then it's going to let things into the aquifer quicker. It also depends on, if you're in a sandy area, maybe the sand is actually part of the aquifer at the surface. We have that in Mason County, Illinois, where the aquifer is the water table and it starts at the surface because it's all sandy. There's much more risk of water quality problems over there because of that, because anything that falls on the ground or is sprayed or whatever, some of it's going to infiltrate. And so, and if it's much harder soil, it's going to run off. And it depends on where you're getting your water from. If it's a shallow dug or bored well, then it's more likely that surface infiltration is going to be a part of that. If it's a much deeper well, then it depends on a lot of other factors, whether there's a confining layer and all those things, whether that aquifer is actually susceptible to surface influences. So but in an aquifer, you can also have, as we've talked about already, natural occurring contaminants. So if you need to understand what might be there naturally, whether it's arsenic, radium, or I mentioned beryllium in Rhode Island, all that affects what your water quality might be. Do you need to chlorinate the water? Only when testing indicates you have a bacteria problem. So there's no reason to chlorinate your well ever if you've not tested. And groundwater can be perfectly safe, as I mentioned. And some people, like, well, we chlorinate on a schedule. That's a bad idea. Chlorine's an oxidant. It can release metals from both your pump, your pipes, from the geologic materials in your aquifer. If you're in a bedrock aquifer, some of those are really high in a lot of metals. And pouring chlorine down there can release all that into the water and make it dangerous to drink. So you should test, and if you have bacteria, that's when you would chlorinate. How good is a UV light? Well, so UV, ultraviolet light, is another method for treatment of bacteria. And it depends on the treatment device, like everything else. Use a certified unit that's certified to kill bacteria and all those things. But once you know you have a unit that's it's certified, then it can be a very good device for killing and inactivating bacteria and viruses. So if you use UV, the one issue is the water needs to be clear so that the UV light can penetrate through the whole column. It's a clear tube kind of thing. And so you'd usually put a filter in front of it to remove any turbidity in the water. And then if you've done that, then it's a great alternative to chlorination. Some people don't want chlorination, continuous chlorination I'm talking about too, where you have to chlorinate because your water source is continually contaminated. And the great example of that are springs. Springs are always contaminated. They always have bacteria. They're basically surface water. And so you see a lot of UV systems in use where people have springs, in the karst areas in Kentucky, Tennessee, Southern Illinois, Indiana, New York, Arizona. There's springs everywhere. And so a UV unit is an alternative, mainly because then you don't have that chlorine taste that some people don't like. Okay, shock chlorination. What's the best way to chlorinate shock a well? So I showed you earlier that we have backup materials basically, or supplemental materials for each of the lessons. Under lesson 10 is this document at the bottom, Well and Water System Disinfection for Private Wells from the Minnesota Department of Health. And again, I talk about them a lot because they do such good work, but this is by far the best source of following step-by-step how to shock chlorinate your well of any other document I've come across. And so this is the one we recommend. It's a step-by-step procedure. It's thorough. It shows pictures. It has a table for how to mix it. You don't want to put chlorine at too much of a concentration. All the things you need to do. Basically, you mix it in a bucket at a certain concentration, and you put it in your well based on the amount of water in your well and the diameter, and then you circulate it. You run a hose back through the top, and you turn on a spigot, and you circulate the water in your well until it's all mixed. And then you turn that off, and then you turn on all the spigot, every faucet, spigot, shower, toilet in your home, and until you smell back chlorine, then you shut it off and leave it overnight. And then the chlorinated water in all those lines will kill the bacteria that are in your system, because you're not sure where the bacteria came from. Is it a growth that's in one of the pipes in your house? Is it in the well? Is it somewhere in between? So you need to disinfect everything. And so then it's really good explanation. And so that's what I'd recommend. So if you look under our class resources under lesson 10, you'll find this document there, and you can click on it and download it. What can I do to prevent a power surge from a lightning strike or from lightning strikes? So we had this question a few months ago, and I didn't answer it on the webinar because I wasn't sure how to. And so I've talked to a number of folks, and I got back to the well owner who originally asked the question, but this came up again today, so I thought I'd share it. There's a company that basically deals with protecting infrastructure from lightning strikes. And when I talked to their person, the solution is to put surge protection on all of your electric lines connected to your well pump and any electric systems in your home. Every one, not some of them. And the deal is when lightning strikes, like the purpose of a lightning rod is to ground the lightning strike. Well, that surge spreads out over the ground. And so it will hit your well, whether you have a lightning rod on your house or not, it's still going to surge your well. And so unless it's far enough away that it would completely dissipate before it got to your well, which isn't very likely, not at least on your own property. And so the best thing to do is surge protection. If you're in an area, and this was a person who was in an area where they have a lot of lightning strikes. It's really interesting. And as far as this case, I'm just learning about it too, but I've talked to a few people, and this seems to be the best solution. Is there treatment for nitrate? So yes, there is. There are several treatment methods that work for nitrate. Again, the Minnesota Department of Health just developed this guide, and it's called Home Water Treatment, and it's amazing. It's the most comprehensive and easiest to understand tool that I've seen. And I am in Illinois. I don't live in Minnesota or work for Minnesota, just to be clear. But like I said, they do a lot of great work. And so this guide is called Home Water Treatment. And if you just Google MN Home Water Treatment, it'll come right up. And it says if you're selecting, like I want to show, I mentioned earlier that you want to use certified treatment equipment. These are the 3 labels you should be looking for here on the far right. NSF, or National Sanitation Foundation, the gold seal for the Water Quality Association, and a certified water quality symbol for Underwriters Labs. So if treatment equipment doesn't have one of those 3 things, then it hasn't been certified to actually remove what they claim it will. You're just going on the company's own recommendation or their own claim. And that's why we have certification bodies for everything from light bulbs to furnaces. It's because that way it keeps everybody honest and above board, so to speak. So I would never buy treatment equipment that doesn't meet that. But to get to the question about nitrate, there's a list on here on one of the pages that it lists all the common constituents. So there's nitrate I've highlighted, and then across the top are the types of treatment that will take care of it. And distillation's one of them. That's I know there are distillation units. I don't know a lot about them, so I didn't include that in the rest of this. But anion exchange and reverse osmosis, which those are more common. And so when you scroll down further, then you find for anion exchange, it describes what it is, the pros and cons, the costs, and this is from 2 years ago, and then what it removes. And so it has this for every type of treatment device that they list in this document. And then, for RO, I mentioned RO removes a lot of things. Well, if you look over at the right, you can see all the things beside nitrate that it does remove. And yeah, and so it lists point of entry and point of use. You should only be looking at the point of use things. Now, there's a few types of constituents where point of entry might make sense if it has a dermal effect and things like that. But I would definitely talk to your doctor and your local health department before you made any decision to put in a point of entry cost device. You can see the cost there for RO, initial $300 to $1,500 versus $5,000 to $12,000. And in most cases, if you're just removing arsenic, you're wasting a lot of money. Yeah. Okay, that's what we have. It's 5 till. We have a number of questions. I'm going to get to those right now. Let me pull that up and bring that over here. And I'm going to make it a little larger so that everybody can see it better. Hang on one second. There we go. Okay, so what 2 states don't have well construction regulation? I think I mentioned that already, but it's Alaska and Pennsylvania. And so, yeah, I know Alaska, they have a work group, a groundwater and wells work group of state agency folks and other stakeholders. They're trying to work on changing that. But in Pennsylvania, they have a really strong extension program in Pennsylvania at Penn State, providing support for well owners. And they've even had some local jurisdictions like watershed groups or counties that have passed laws that require wells to be drilled by a certified driller from the National Groundwater Association, their certification program, which doesn't have authority per se in states, but it's one way that they've decided that they're going to make sure that they get the right kind of drillers drilling their wells. And so, yeah, if you're in one of those states, I can direct you to some of the right folks there. Just email us. Our problem in Ethiopia is not at source majorly, but it is at consumption or point of use, such as at drinking cups. We have a standard survey tool on these cups. Do you have any info on this? You know, why don't you email us more information? I'm not sure what you mean by drinking cups. And so maybe send me a picture and we could try to work with you. But yeah, I'm a fish out of water, so to speak. I've with some of the issues that you're facing over there, and so I'd probably need more information. But I'd be glad to talk to you about it. Where should softener backwash be routed? You know, that kind of depends on the state you're in. Some use I can't remember what they're called, but some kind of well that they put them in. Some states those are outlawed. I would talk to your softener professional, or boy, if you tell me where you're at, what state you're in, if you email us, I can also talk to the Water Quality Association. They represent some of the softener companies and have dealt with some of these things and might be able to get you to someone who would have a better idea. You know, there's a whole issue with softener backwash about because it's, you know, it's fairly concentrated in a few constituents, whether that's harmful or not to a septic tank. Some folks say it is, some say it isn't. And so, yeah, if you would email us and I can probably get you some more information. Does the State Water Survey Public Service Lab still do water testing? Yes, it does. So it used to be free. Any well owner in Illinois could get a free water test for inorganics and metals from the Water Survey. And we moved from DNR as a state agency to the University of Illinois as a department on campus. And now we can't do that. And the U of I requires us to, our lab to be, you know, the sample cost has to all be covered. And so what that's done is raised our prices a lot. From, you know, at one point you could get a full set of analysis that might cost $150 for $35. And now our costs, because we're a small lab, are higher than that even. But we do testing, and there's a push. It's the public service lab is actually a small piece of our entire lab services, which is called HEAL, which is the Health and Environmental Applications Lab. So if you go to our website, you can look at HEAL there. And what they offer. What was the URL for the website to put these results in for water testing? Okay, you already took care of that. Thank you. Are electromagnetic descaler water systems effective? I understand the elemental composition doesn't change, but I'm curious about informed opinions of them. Well, and I will honestly say that I'm not an informed opinion because I've never dealt with those. And so I'd have to go find someone who does have an informed opinion to give you an answer. And I'm sorry I don't. But it's not, you know, we don't work a lot on the that end of the spectrum for private wells. Inside the home and some of those things. I'm a groundwater hydrologist, and most of the work I do is related to groundwater and source water on that side of the well issue. And so yeah, I don't know. I could probably find someone who can give me a better answer. But I'd have to do some looking. So, is there oil and gas drilling near my? Oh, there is oil and gas drilling near my house. Is there anything I should test for specifically? I'm in Mississippi, and all local state offices I called told me there was nothing to worry about. But I'd rather be safe than sorry. My well is 70 feet deep, if that matters. Well, a lot of the oil and gas drilling is fairly deep, and I don't know the rules in Mississippi, and so as far as what to test for, you know, that's not something that we've dealt with here. There are folks in Pennsylvania who probably have some ideas. We could reach out to Penn State Extension for you, but you know, a shallower well is much less likely to be an issue just because oil and gas drilling is so much deeper, and usually all of that's cased off. But we did have a case once in Southern Illinois with a oil and gas well where the well wasn't properly sealed for the salt water they pushed down. And all of a sudden, some of the wells in the area, the water levels started rising, and they were basically pushing water into an aquifer. Rare case, and it didn't necessarily affect the water quality per se, as far as some of the harmful chemicals that they might use for, fracking or other things. But yeah, I'm dancing around this because I don't have a great answer for you. But I'd be glad to find one if you want to email us. How do you get calcium out of the water? We are in limestone layer, and there's tons of calcium that help. I hear vinegar. That's a question I would ask our geochemist, Walt Kelly, and I can certainly do that. And again, I need to get your email, and I can get back to you. So, yeah, the chemistry side is where I'm weakest, if you will, and some of it I know, and some I don't, and I don't know the answer there. Will well chlorination and procedure described remove iron bacteria in pipes? So iron bacteria is a really big problem because it grows so fast and it's so ubiquitous in the ground. If you have iron bacteria in your well, you can certainly shock chlorinate it, and it might take 2 or 3 times or even more to get rid of it because it grows in layers, but it will probably come back. And so the procedure I described was for shock chlorinating. It's like a one-time thing to kill bacteria. I would say that likely will not work. Even if it short-term remove them, they will come back. What you likely need is continuous chlorination. And I mean, because I'm assuming it's the smell that's really the problem for you. Yeah, it's a real problem, and it tends to be, if you have iron bacteria, it keeps coming back. And there's different types of bacteria that are just ubiquitous in groundwater, and so if they're there, they're not. It's not a well issue. It's not your plumbing issue. It's in the groundwater, and so that's typically the case with that. Okay, so here's the email address, info@privatewellclass.org. I apologize for the questions I couldn't answer today, but if you will email us, and if you're looking for CEs, either through NEHA or LNEHP, or if you just want a certificate because you have a different accrediting agency, or I know some drillers are on this as well, usually, that need a certificate, just email us and we will get this all done for you. With that, it's 5 after 3 Central Time. I appreciate everyone who stuck on, and yeah, if you have any further questions, this is the email to reach us at, and thank you for your time. And thanks, Katie. I apologize again for calling you Jennifer today. All right,
No
take care.
worries.